Ah, the countryside. What relief for a tired mind. And a great place also to give the body the exercise it needs. I grew up in a village and I had the luxury to be able to go running in the countryside, just a few minutes away from my house. But that was something I took for granted and I found my village to be incredibly boring. I wished I was in the city, where you wouldn't have to take the bus to take part in social activities and where there was interesting architecture to look at. I'm someone that loves exploring cities, and I've always assumed that more city, more urbanity equals better. And on an emotional level, that's because I know how boring single house suburbias are, like the one I grew up in. But there is a much stronger environmental argument for the dense city, and that is that it consumes less land, and because people and functions are close together, there's no need for cars. And since infringements on natural habitats are happening on such a scale that planet Earth has entered a phase of mass extinction, and since car traffic causes both for air quality and carbon dioxide emissions and noise and traffic deaths, and actually also takes up a lot of space. These disadvantages to low density urban development are very serious problems when it's happening on a global scale. Then last year I finally ended up living in central Malmö. It's a big city by Nordic standards. And I lived in a part where a lot of the big roads converge. And at the same time, far away from all the bigger park areas in the city. So it was a noisy and somewhat bleak area. And there wasn't really anywhere nearby to escape to. I found that motivating myself to go out for my usual runs was more difficult in this situation. I knew that I needed to get outside and move to feel well, but I also knew that the outside environment that I would then be in would not be as restorative to my mind as what I had been used to. I felt a little bit trapped. And I'm someone that loves Malmo with all its quirks. I can only imagine what it's like for someone who doesn't have that bias. So, with that experience behind me, I can somewhat understand why cities in Sweden and Belgium and the USA and many other places in the last 50 years have expanded radically with neighborhoods that are much greener and much calmer. But given the problems with low density development that I outlined before, I still don't think it's defensible. So are urban planners like me then sentencing humanity to living in cramped city centers for all future? Well, that is the ideal state I have been imagining. Until now. Enter Stuttgart. Stuttgart is a city of 600,000 people, officially. That places it alongside Gothenburg and double the size of Malmö. The view you see here was recorded about 6 kilometers outside the center of the city, as were all the shots of the green countryside that you have seen so far. In fact, the landscape wedges stretch as close in as about 2 kilometers from the center of Stuttgart. 2 kilometers from the center of Malmö, it looks like this. That's right, that's the edge of Malmö's inner city. And thereafter follows suburbs for another 4 kilometers until the outer ring road. This is what most larger cities look like, on differing scales of course. But Stuttgart follows a radically different pattern. Instead of letting an ever thicker ring of suburbs grow around its dense urban core, landscape such as fields and forests has been reserved in its immediate vicinity. Suburbs are then built as dozens of, or possibly even hundreds, of satellites dispersed in the landscape. But they are relatively high density suburbs, making it possible for them to be well served by public transport, and in many cases rail. They are by no means very dense. In fact, a lot of it looks like the higher range of density that you could find in Swedish suburbs. But the very prevalent lower range of density that you find in Swedish suburbs is not there. The space that would have been taken by single-family houses is instead left as open landscape. And the fact is that when you count all these little suburban islands together, which have up to about 45 minutes commute into Stuttgart Central Station, you find that 2.8 million people live in Stuttgart's metropolitan area, and the absolute majority of them with the countryside just a few minutes away from their house. Now, you ask, didn't you say before that the big advantage with the dense city is proximity, so that you don't have to drive? Well, yes I did, but that's a question of scale. A city based on biking can only grow so big until the distances become too large to be covered by bike. The growth of Stuttgart's continuous urban area has been contained at just that size, one that can be crossed by bike in half an hour or 15 minutes from edge to center. When it comes to public transport, the separated suburban islands don't necessarily have to mean longer travel times. The stations will be further apart, but the trains can drive faster in between the stations since they are outside of the urban area. Of course, cars do also play a part here in this city. In fact, Stuttgart is the city where the car was first invented. Now, with that fact in mind, it's stunningly simple to get around using public transport. Hopping from suburban island to suburban island, and to take walks into the countryside in this metropolis of almost 3 million.